People who were on reality family shows as kids, think Super Nanny, Wife Swap, etc. How much of it was real and how much was fiction / set up for drama? Did anything change? A girl I went to school with was on my Super Sweet 16. She was always quiet but well-liked, and the kids on that show were usually monsters, so we were curious about how the episode would paint her. There was one scene where she was checking in on a vendor and they said something might not be finished in time for the party, and she didn't have a meltdown or anything, but she said something dramatic like,
"Oh no, that's going to ruin my whole birthday party."
After the episode aired, her friends who were with her said they did a couple of takes because her first reaction was like,
"Oh, that sucks. Thanks for letting me know."
Story 2. My parents were dinner guests in an episode of Nanny 911, and they said literally everything was staged. I don't remember all of the details, but they said the directors had a code word that they would say to the kids when they were supposed to start acting all crazy, and then once the scene was done, the kids would be perfectly normal. Story 3. I was on a dog training TV show when I was 8-ish. The idea was that the dog trainer came in and helped our family integrate our new puppy into our household, to give us training tips and advice, etc. The whole thing basically was bogus. The quote-unquote trainer came to our house for maybe 30 minutes tops, gave us extremely basic advice. The producers also told us we had to get changed and pretend that he was visiting us 3 months later after he gave us the advice, and how it made our life better, yada yada yada. It's so dumb because our puppy was clearly the same age in the before and 3 months after shots. And my family aren't actors, so our reactions were really fake. One of the producers also made me say, quote, "I love you, dog's name," while hugging him for about 6 takes. Yes, because there's no way to get someone to show genuine love more than to make them do it over and over and over again. I guarantee you, OP, they ended up using the first take anyway. Story 4. I worked with 2 people who were on Teen Mom, grandmother and granddaughter. Obviously, the granddaughter was the teen mom. They told me that the directors would intentionally set up stuff that would cause drama and then start filming. For example, the directors had them go out to lunch and told the grandmother something she didn't know yet, and filmed their argument for drama, knowing she would get upset that the granddaughter hadn't told her before, even though she was planning to. Really dumb, unnecessary drama for TV. But apparently the baby got tons of scholarships and support from the show, which is why they did it in the first place. So they said it was still worth it. Story 5. My dad was asked to be on an episode of TLC's My Strange Addiction. He runs kind of a niche, small business. And they were like, "Hey, you're addicted to this, right?" He was like, no. And they were like, "Well, can you pretend to be addicted to this and you can be on the show?" And he was like, no. Edit. It was a honeybee business. They were hoping he was addicted to bee stings. Story 6. A classmate of mine was on my country's Next Top Model. Before getting into the show, she was asked what kind of hair she would never want to get, so that the producers knew about it and wouldn't make her have it during the makeover episode. My classmate had long blonde hair, which she really loved. So she said she doesn't want them to cut her hair off and that she also hated strange, unnatural colors like blue or pink. Fast forward to the makeover episode, the hairstyling team comes in and finds her hair unfitting for a model, so she needs to get a makeover, and guess what? Her makeover consisted of a pixie cut and green hair to make her look like a, quote, punk fairy. My classmate cried throughout the entire process, so I guess the producers got the drama they wanted out of this. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say this wasn't the intention from the beginning, only because the idea of people asking, what would you absolutely not want specifically to do it later, would instantly make me lose all faith in humanity. Story 7. I was on Wife Swap when I was 10 years old. My family had to switch with a farming family and we were supposed to be the city family, even though my family and I lived in the suburbs. There were plenty of quotes taken out of context, as you would expect. They also incited plenty of drama. I was framed as addicted to video games, so they took my Xbox and Game Boy Color for the week. A few days in, one of the crew members came in with my Game Boy and said, "Look, I found this," and handed it to me. It shouldn't be surprising that they sent the woman staying in our house into my room to catch me in the act. To be honest, not much has really changed in my life except getting Snapchats of my 10-year-old face when my friends catch the reruns. For anyone who's curious about how much money the show gave us, the initial amount was $20,000, but after taxes it was more like 15. Story 8. Yep, a close friend was on MTV's True Life about having crippling social anxiety disorder. The episode was about different fears people had. We were a big circle of friends since elementary. We always knew he was sort of socially awkward and battled with the way he looked. He was super insecure and self-conscious about his looks. and he admittedly got teased the most by the more alphas of the group, the most insecure. But we loved and embraced him and made sure he knew that, and that he was equals with us. Anyway, they filmed us all for a couple of weeks in high school hanging out. This was back in 2001, by the way. We were going out, etc. He was crushing on a girl we knew. In fact, she was part of the larger social circle anyway, and so they convinced him to ask for her number. I guess this was going to be the storyline they needed. He already had it since we were all one big friend group, but they, quote, needed something for the story. That was the big goal for his arc. So he asks one night while we're at a movie theater. She gave it to him and hey, all's good. They went on one date but didn't amount to anything. They remained friends just as they were before. Fast forward to airing, and I don't know if you remember, but at the end of each episode they have a black screen with text on it, like the final update. The text for his final update read, "Despite finally building the courage to ask for her number, she gave him a fake number. He spiraled after that and it screwed him up way more than he was before. He turned to drugs to cope. Since he was basically humiliated on MTV with hundreds of millions of viewers, he unfortunately passed away from a drug overdose a few years later. Edit. Coincidentally, MTV has done everything they can to wipe that episode off the internet and pretend it never existed. We've never been able to find it, and a few of us are very Google Fu inclined and resourceful with internet archival retrieval, but it truly is nowhere to be found. Every other episode is available, though. They know they screwed up. Story 9. One of my neighbors was on a house disaster reno show and it was a mixed bag. I think the crew hired by the show actually did very competent structural reno and repair type work, but the designer had super niche tastes. So the family ended up repainting everything and pitching all the decoration aspects to get the house ready for resale after having to act super happy for the cameras. Story 10. Not me, but I bumped into someone that was on the Property Brothers show. According to them, the two brothers were only ever on site for the filming. They threw out/hauled away all the person's furniture, and what it was replaced with was very pretty looking but hard and uncomfortable and bad quality, like had to be replaced within a year. It was impractical for the family, and the family couldn't get anything from before the makeover back that they wanted. Story 11. I used to know someone whose neighbor was actually a participant on Extreme Makeover. Here's some things of what I remember. There are no such things as a free house. Foreclosures are all too common, shady taxes, lawsuits, and legal action. What people really don't understand is that the large majority of these families are barely scraping by, and they are then given this gigantic mansion with bills that were 3 times what they were used to. Story 12. My boyfriend and I filmed the pilot for a show. It's in production currently and is supposed to be picked up by a company. The show features us and another couple going on cheap dates with a fixed budget. The couple with the best cheap date wins an expensive date package. There were a lot of weird moments. When engaging with the host, she kept messing up her lines and would sometimes say something several times before getting it right, and we had to react like she didn't just spend 3 minutes stuttering. None of the conversations with her were natural, because she would pause to reword her lines a lot while we sat there with a frozen smile on. We were prompted what to say frequently and did a lot of retakes. It took all day to film, quote, 2 hours. Everything had to be set up. Everything. We were mic'd at each location change, business owners had to agree to us popping up, etc. Sometimes we would say something and the director would ask us to repeat it. The cameras are hard to ignore, especially when at any second the director would say, "Talk about blank, but in full statements." It was fun though. I really liked talking to the sound guy about his experiences. He was telling some industry horror stories. Also, me and my boyfriend lost, so we went to a bar and laughed about it. Story 13. So not technically a big well-known reality show, but there used to be a home makeover show that had 5 different designers that would get their own episode on a rotational basis. And my mom was one of them. From one of her episodes, she actually did a makeover of our own house as she was selling it. She made my brother and I stay with her for the week of filming. Parents are divorced, which I thought was weird, but whatever. She roped my teen brother into making some art for the show, so he got his little bit of fame, and I just hid in my room for the whole week. I remember I thought I had caught my mom alone, and we had a conversation where I expressed how uncomfortable I felt with people in our house, and asked why I had to stay that week at her house, as there was no arrangement ever on which house my brother and I stayed at. Anyway, some camera guy snuck up on us and filmed the whole thing without me knowing, and then asked me if I could repeat myself but be more mad at my mom. I felt so violated. Also, the fact there were 4 mid-20-year-olds hanging out right outside my bedroom the whole week and I was 16 or 17. That was just so freaking creepy, especially when I think about it years later. Story 14. So I was on wife swap when I was 13 or so, and they made up more than half of it. You see, they make it so there's a nice family and a bad family. They made us the bad family of 10 living in a house bus. All the stuff they can't make look bad, they don't put on the show. They act nice and all, but they make you look like a fool on TV. I remember my mom coming back home crying and stressed out. One whole year later, they decide to put it on TV. I could hardly watch the episode with us in it because of how cringy it was. Story 15. I worked on a show like this, saw all the raw footage. It was hundreds of hours of footage turned into a 43-minute show. So of course, by omission, you're not getting the full story. But I would say the first 85% of the show was more or less real. The kids would act up, the parents were overwhelmed, etc. When the parents were sat down and the star explained what she was seeing, the emotions and feedback were real. What was not real in certain weeks was the wrap-up. In each episode, the problems were resolved, but that wasn't often the case. Also, the solution was always the same and the problem was always the parent. It was eye-opening. I'm convinced now if a kid acts up, it's the parent's fault. The parent might be a nice person, sincerely mean well, but they don't possess the skills and discipline it takes to be a good parent. The solution was always 1, be consistent. That means individually and as parents. 2, give the child structure. Let them know what they'll be doing that day. Being a good parent is not about giving your child complete freedom to do whatever they want. It bores and frustrates them. 3, give them little rewards for doing the right thing. Even if it's just a sticker or drawing a happy face on the calendar or something, don't take their good behavior for granted. 4, listen to them. Don't act like they don't know what real problems are or what real suffering is. If they're feeling sad and frustrated, acknowledge that it is real and let them talk. Don't interrupt them to offer a garbage solution or tell them they're being ridiculous. Most of the time, kids just need to vent. So all of that stuff was real. A lot of the times, the parents thought they were victims, unlucky to simply be given kids who weren't perfect robots. And you could tell the problems would reappear after the taping stopped. But on the show, it always ended with everybody in the family coming around. Happy ever after. This is what I hear it's like for a lot of kitchen shows like Gordon Ramsay type stuff. They go in, fix everything, and a couple months later it all reverts back to how it was and the business goes under. It's an interesting contrast to the rest of the ones we've read where it's like everything is fake, over half of it is fake, whatever. OP is really saying here that's like, no, for their show, whatever they worked on, a lot of it was real. The parents were just really awful. Story 16. A friend of a friend's Mustang was in South Beach Tow. The business is a legitimate towing business. One of the directors came up to him and told him that his car was being towed for some infraction. It was the friend's fault entirely, so the towing business was actually in the right. But before the car would be towed, he was told that if he agreed to be in a scene because his car looked expensive/unique, they'll have everything set up for his grand entrance. And if he acted all surprised/made a spat and go crazy, they'll just give him the car back at the pound. He didn't agree to it because he didn't want his face shown on TV and the director was cool with it. But he did allow the car to be in the scene. Had he refused everything, they would have just towed the car and moved on. Well, on the flip of a switch, 2 actors came out of nowhere, a couple, and they filmed the scene. It was crazy, overblown, and as terribly acted as you would expect for a show like this. You had these 2 random people/actors freaking out about a Mustang being towed that wasn't even theirs. He thought the whole thing was hilarious. Thankfully, he was so chill with the entire thing and with the crew/actors in general that even though he didn't agree to be in the scene, they just gave him his car back once everything was over. He calls it a win to this day. I respect that director. Or producer, or whoever it actually was. I don't know if the director would be the one asking that. But seriously, asking and getting a no and being like, no, that's cool, we'll do it this way then. That's respectful and not often seen in show business. Story 17. A little off topic, but similar. Jupiter Entertainment reenacts true stories for shows like For My Man, Vengeance, Fatal Attraction, Homicide Hunters, etc. Much of the acting is filmed with no sound because the voiceover will be explaining the story. They've filmed many shows at my house. I usually just hide in a corner of the kitchen and watch them film. I swear it's more entertaining than the shows. One scene had 2 men arguing over a woman. They got really into it with sweat and spittle flying. Then the woman walks down my hallway and confronts them. It's a big, scary, screaming fight. Thing is, you don't know what they're really saying. Let me tell you, we were all nearly crying with laughter. It sounded something like this. What do you think you're doing with my woman? What do you mean, your woman? I came here to eat some pizza. Well, I'll stuff this pizza right up your freaking butt and you'll like it. I hate pizza and you can't make me. Besides, that woman is preggers with my baby and we're gonna name it Pizza. You can't do that, because my name is Pizza, you stupid pretty boy. I know I'm pretty. Do you want to go for pizza when this is over? Woman walks up. What the hell is the matter with you guys? My poor pizza baby has its feelings hurt because you don't like it. That baby's father is Taco Bell and not me. You're gonna have a burrito, not a pizza. Wow, you are so mean. Can we have salad for dinner break? Oh wait, how about poke bowl? There's a great place just a couple minutes from here. I think that's a great idea because I hate pizza. And so on. Vicious on camera, but hilarious in real life. Yeah, I didn't realize for a good amount of time there that what they said wasn't recorded by the cameras. Like it was just a visual. For a second or two, I was like, why are they saying that? What? How is this supposed to be a serious reenactment? Oh, there's no sound. As an actor, I've also gotten to do a couple things like this, and being able to say really whatever you want is kind of fun. Story 18. I was friends with a guy whose brother was on the show 16 and pregnant. He and his at the time girlfriend were featured. They made him out to be the bad guy, but he wasn't anything like the way he was made out on TV. I'd hung out with them years before and during filming. He had his stupid moments, but is overall a good guy. She talked about being on the show before they did the deed, red flag number 1, and when the kids were born, she took them and ran away on a few occasions, once claiming he could see the babies when he flew to see them, and she never showed up to pick him up. He was left stranded in a different state. So when you watch those shows, it may not always be as it seems. It can be entertaining, but don't take what you see as fact. They start a lot of drama just for the audience at the cost of the individuals. Story 19. Extreme Makeover Home Edition came to our neighborhood once. The family lived a few streets away, right next door to my older brother's best friend. His mother is also my mother's best friend, so we were there a lot. The woman getting the new house was a single mother to 5 adopted sons, most of whom were sick. This woman was always nasty. Her neighbors will tell you she was absolutely miserable to be around. Petty about people parking in front of her house, yelling at us anytime a wiffle ball or frisbee ended up in her yard, shouting at neighbors about being too loud while having a party. Basically, every molehill became a mountain. She was a Karen ahead of her time. When she got picked for the show, the neighborhood was floored. The show made her out to be a saint among heathens, which we all expected, but knowing the real her, it was just so damn frustrating for all of us. I used to play football with one of her sons, and he would say that life was never that great after the new house because they were constantly under a spotlight now. Everyone suddenly wanted to come over, and they had to keep a police car outside 24/7. They lost all privacy. They flew away to Disney for the week, and Ty Pennington and crew got to work and built them a gorgeous home. She immediately proceeded to try to sell it for profit, and when that failed, never paid her property taxes, and was ultimately evicted because the town kept putting a lien on her house. Story 20. I was kind of in one for one episode. I used to live with a couple of friends of mine who owned their own remodeling business. They were contacted by HGTV to be on a show about flipping houses. Basically, the hosts of the show knew absolutely nothing. The hosts would have my friends show them what tools to use and how to use them for a shot, and then the cameras would roll and hosts would act like they were doing all of the work. It was all fake, though the work was really done by my friends and the house was really sold. Last I heard, the family still lives there. Story 21. My family and our home were on that show, This Old House, in the late 90s. Norm Abrams was the host, and they picked our house because of my dad's collection of Shaker furniture. The idea was that we gave him a tour of the house while being filmed, and then he demonstrated to the camera how to make furniture like ours. Everything was 100% genuine. Norm and the crew were kind and super respectful to all of us. No second takes. When he explained to the camera how to build replicas of Shaker furniture, it became apparent that he was a master woodworker. Before he left, we all took photos together and he signed some stuff. It was a really special day. That was right when reality TV was starting to pick up steam. MTV's The Real World was big at the time. I don't think Survivor had come out yet. That was the show that opened the floodgates. Story 22. My dad was an editor and taught editing before he died. One of the biggest things he stressed to us about things like this is that when they're shooting with one camera, you can tell because there's only one camera angle, and you see a cut, that means there was a passage of time you didn't see. Also, the editor's job is to create moments that get an emotional response from you. That's what art is. So if you're watching and two people are arguing and one says something and then there's a cut to the other's face being speechless or something, that's meaningful to you, and you're like, wow, burn. But in reality, the person could have had a great comeback and continued the argument, and the editor used a reaction from 10 minutes ago when the sound guy was giving him instructions. A series of events can be A, B, C, D, but an editor can think A, D, C, B tells a more compelling story and do that instead. Reality TV, real people not actors commercials, movies like Borat, all use a ton of edits in a short period of time. These are entertainment or advertising, so deception is expected or inconsequential. In my opinion, it's fine to use this technique, but we as viewers should know that every time there's an edit or cut, something was cut out. Usually for flow, but deception is possible. Story 23. I was on set for an episode of Married at First Sight recently. They were filming a scene at my workplace. There were a few guests that had appeared in reality shows before who claimed that the reality shows they had been on were heavily scripted, but this one didn't seem to be. Some people were asking the producers about what would happen during filming, and the producers kept saying they didn't know. They just kind of start the cameras and see what happens. The couple seemed to get along really well, didn't look like there was much drama. The crew was pretty picky about how the room was set up and what was in the background of the shot, but other than that, they weren't too controlling. If anything, my biggest complaint with the crew was punctuality. They told some guests to get there earlier than they were scheduled to get there themselves, and then they showed up 40 minutes later than scheduled anyway. I heard that this is pretty normal for TV crews though. Story 24. I wasn't on one of those shows, but the nanny for one of my son's classmates was featured on one of them. She was an awesome person, and her powers over kids were amazing. She just connected so well with the kids and could get them to do whatever needed to be done with a quiet voice. I recall one day where I was watching with my son and a friend after school, and we stopped at a local coffee shop for a snack and to do some homework. Snack time went fine, but the kids had no interest in doing the homework. At some point, Nanny arrived with my son's friend, and within a minute everyone was doing their homework and having a great time doing it. Story 25. I knew a girl whose sister was on Bad Girls Club Season 9. She said that being on the show was emotionally and physically exhausting. They would intentionally not feed them and give them a ton of alcohol instead, so the girls were hangry and incredibly drunk. They got almost no privacy, and the producers would intentionally stir up drama, telling girls lies about other girls, etc., and then just to let the fuse go off. It was interesting to watch the season too, because the girl and I are both the children of East African immigrants, which is how I met her sister, and our immigrant community in the US is very religious, judgmental, and tight-knit. Honestly, it was cool for me as a teenager to know someone who was also East African, but comfortable with the drinking and cursing on TV. She was definitely very messy on the show, but it's a form of freedom, and I appreciated that. Story 26. I've said this before, but my friend's family was on wife swap. My friend's mom was the, quote, villain. The other mom was presented as a total saint. What they didn't show is the woman was supposed to muck the horse barn, feed the chickens, and something else farm-related. She refused and had a terrible crying fit. They have an incredibly nice barn and setup. At the end, the woman budgeted how the money was to be spent. On TV, the amount didn't add up. In real life, she gave money for them to hire a horse mucker. Story 27. I was on the Long Island Medium in 2013. Teresa came to my house to do a private reading, and it was voted as one of the best readings of the season. The problem is, she's full of crap. The production crew were awesome folks, though, and not to mention, I was borderline blacked out drunk at 3 in the afternoon for the reading, but you wouldn't be able to tell watching it. The episode was called Diving Right In, and she addressed my father's passing in 2010. She pulled on my heartstrings, and I cried my eyes out. I'm 18 months sober now. Story 28. Canadian Idol. Producers tell you which songs to sing. First, they make you sing in line. If you're really bad or really good, you're put through to the producers. My friend made it through, honestly an incredible singer. She had been singing one song the whole time and made it to the judges. She sang her song that got her that far, which was My Hero by Foo Fighters. Then, before she goes to the judges, the producers say she's going to sing Creep by Radiohead, as Foo Fighters aren't on the list of approved songs. So she sings Creep, doesn't impress the judges, and doesn't make it through. We then watched the show when it's aired, and these people edited her into the opening and said, the good, the bad, and the just plain creepy, and showed her singing Creep. She was this gothic girl who didn't fit in with the usual pop star image, and she was so humiliated she never sang again. Also, Ben Mulrooney is one of the worst human beings I've ever met. I knew the Idol shows had some sort of chicanery going about them, but this is garbage. Making you switch songs right before you get to the judges, and I guarantee you the producers were like, ah yes, we'll make her sing Creep, and then say she's creepy, ha ha ha, prime time comedy. I hate that. I'm so sorry. Story 29. I was a production assistant read lackey on a reality TV pilot about, quote, soccer moms. The premise is they find a housewife, give her whatever her dream job is for a week, and then at the end of the week ask if she wants to keep the job. During the week, they create family drama, set it up as working versus loving your husband and kids, and put the mom in ridiculous situations at her new job. It's all manufactured, the same way as all these shows are. The executive producer will be set up in the backyard feeding questions to the director and cameraman. They set up fake conflicts constantly. She chose her family, and hopefully all got therapy afterward. Story 30. A friend of mine was on Much Music, Canadian MTV reality show, where they grant someone's wish. The person the show was mainly focused on was a woman he had hooked up with on vacation who wanted to reconnect. They flew her and him to Toronto to meet up without telling him what was actually happening. They told him it was a contest he had won, so it would be a surprise when he saw her again. He was the man of her dreams, but to him, she was just some girl he hooked up with. The look on his face when he sees her for the first time is priceless. Pure anguish and cringe. Highly recommend if you want to watch someone suffer. Story 31. Not as a kid, but a few years ago, I was on an episode of True Life. They spent about 5 weeks with me in total filming stuff. They hired a therapist for the episode because my real therapist couldn't be on it because of her office rules. Then after filming was over for a while, I dyed my hair, and then they contacted me wanting to do some post-interview shots, and because my hair was a different color, they bought a bunch of those temporary hair color sprays and basically spray painted my hair and brought me to a producer's house and had me stand in different areas and talk about what had gone on and my feelings for what I had, quote, just done. I had no memory of what we had filmed, nor any memory of what I'd been feeling when we filmed. So they had to remind me of everything and basically say, would you say this? I guess. No, literally say it. Also, I had several conversations with producers about how they needed drama and needed me to have something to overcome, so they ended up fabricating some drama between me and my mom. It was really dumb, and I guess now that episode is on Paramount Plus according to my Instagram inbox. Story 32. Not during childhood, but a few years ago I was buying my first house and leaving my family farm in West Virginia. Thought it would be neat to try to get on House Hunters. Filled out the application and got an email and phone call the next week. Of course, you're already in the process of buying the home when you film, so they know you're approved for the loan and etc. Which I knew, but it still seemed fun. So anyway, the lady called from California. She seemed nice enough, but all business. Asked who would tour the house with me, and I said my brother. I was unmarried and he would do well on TV. She asked if my brother liked the house I was buying, and I said yes. She said, that didn't work. She wanted him to try to talk me out of it since it was from the 1870s, and he would try to get me to buy something more modern. They also wanted me to look at other houses and offered to pay only $500, I think. I decided it wasn't worth it, making fake drama and having my whole small town thinking I'm dishonest for 15 minutes of fame. $500 is criminal compared to what everyone else on the show would be making, OP. Good for you for not taking that. Is not worth it. Story 33. My uncle was on one of those $1 million realtor shows in LA. He was absolutely not a millionaire, just had a slight claim to fame making furniture out of airplane parts for rich people in the area. He already had a home that he was quite happy with, but was invited on by a producer friend who basically toured 3 different staged houses, and then he would pick one at the end, then have a barbecue at said house with his friends. Basically, he got paid to look at fancy houses for a weekend, then throw a party at one, all on the dime of the network. Not a bad deal if you're him, but all totally a sham. Story 34. My friend was on the show Cheaters, where you supposedly write into the show if you suspect your partner is cheating and they, quote, investigate, and then show you the evidence all dramatically. Well, my friend was supposed to be the guy the wife was cheating with. He told me he could get paid $200 to pretend to bang with the curtains open, to be caught, or to really bang with her for $600. Anyway, he's $600 richer now. Story 35. Friends were on a home remodeling show with their kids that didn't take off. It was half game show. They had to compete in Price is Right kind of games to win things for the house. Only they filmed that part after the remodeling work was done. The show predetermined what they would win. They were supposed to help with the remodel as well. They only did what was filmed. The kids were disappointed because they wanted to demo everything. All the work was done by contractors. The hosts/decorators just showed up for filming and barely talked to them. The cute chatting and get to know you part was mostly scripted. The family is very arty and colorful, but they were wearing polos and khakis on the show. Overall, they loved the experience. The contractors didn't have to do major structural work, so there was nothing crazy to go wrong. They did fake some problem for drama, but I don't remember what. The takeaway from them was the whole show was fake, but they enjoyed the experience. The crew and contractors were nice and they became friends. They had their house professionally updated and decorated in a week, and they sold a year later and it absolutely helped their resale value. They were picked because they met the producer walking through their neighborhood scouting locations close to the production office in LA. I don't think it ever aired though. The video I saw looked like it was still being edited. Story 36. My family was on Dr. Phil maybe 15 or so years ago. They definitely dug up as much drama as possible, and didn't bring any of it up until on stage. It was actually very traumatic for all of us. They picked us all up in separate SUVs the evening before filming and took us to a very nice expensive hotel for the night. We weren't allowed to leave the hotel and we were picked up by the SUVs in the morning. I'm assuming so we couldn't really speak to each other or chicken out. In the end, everything just felt so much worse. The problems that we went for help with ended up far from better. I guess it wasn't really the fault of the producers or Dr. Phil himself, but it definitely didn't help. 15 years later and everything is a million times better, but no thanks to the show. Not exactly the show type OP was looking for, but I thought I would offer some behind the scenes. Edit. Thinking about this more, and there are definitely things done for TV. They made my mom look like an absolute villain. They painted her in a horrible light. Now, my mom isn't a saint, but watching the way they portrayed her in the edits broke my heart. It was a show about her having an affair and a bunch of other family drama, so she definitely wasn't innocent, but they definitely did her wrong. Story 37. I was on Keisha's Perfect Dress, a spin-off of Say Yes to the Dress. My cousin was looking for her wedding dress. They would have her come out multiple times in the same dress to get different takes of our reactions. Would tell us to say mean things if we didn't like the dress. I was one of the people who they did the one-on-one interview with, and they pretty much made me seem obsessed with my cousin's breasts looking large in the dress because I cracked one joke in the interview about her being flat-chested. She did end up buying her wedding dress from the show, however, and it was very beautiful. I fear I've said that name wrong. Keisha's? I'm so sorry. Never seen it. That being said, OP, that's unfortunate for you. I bet some family members watched that and were like, wow, OP seems really obsessed with his cousin's breasts. Interesting. Well, I guess it's a little less weird now that I think about it because you're probably a woman if you're in this show, but still a funny thing for them to make it look like you fixated on. Story 38. About 1,000 years ago, Fox had a reality series called American Gladiator, which was a bit similar to those Ninja Warrior obstacle course shows. Anyway, being a lowly PR intern, I was sent to the convention center in major Midwestern city because American Gladiator was holding auditions and they needed bodies to help. So there were basically a bunch of different fitness tests, and people who scored above a certain point got sent along even further in the process. I saw some pretty well-trained athletes coming through there. There was this one guy who had dressed for the part but was not remotely athletic. But he had this sort of surfer fitness look about him. He runs his set for me. A fellow intern and I were basically timing 50-yard dashes. I spot one of the producers watching the lines of people waiting to run their dash, and they spotted this Sammy Hagar lookalike. The producer pulls me aside and says, "Hey, you see that guy who looks a bit like Sammy Hagar? Whatever he scores, send him through." He ran with the guy who was super in shape and missed the cut by like 1 second. Sammy Hagar was a good 3 to 4 seconds behind, and everyone in line lost their minds when they saw me reject the actual athlete and send along the guy who would look good on TV. I've never trusted a reality show since. This was about 90/91. They've always been bullcrap. And that athlete dude, sorry man, but you'd have looked stupid. It wasn't about athleticism at all. Story 39. I was on Wife Swap when I was 11 or 12. The show gets hours of footage for 2 weeks, and then puts it into a 1-hour episode. So you can imagine they can try to make the narrative whatever they want. They really try to emphasize what makes your family different, and often exaggerate, or encourage the participants to exaggerate. Due to only 1 or 2 cameras, you often enter the same scene multiple times. So we actually met the swapped wife for the first time 3 different times to get different angles. They also often push the mom to make new rules based on the narrative they want to tell, and ask you questions that could fit that narrative. My family, for example, was portrayed as uneducated hicks that didn't take work seriously. It always left a bad taste in my mouth, and I think it hurt a lot of self-confidence in high school. They also hired people to take care of the kids off set, and the guy we had was borderline abusive, threatening to throw us into the snowbanks when we weren't quiet, and he often got too physical. There was little to no oversight on this. Story 40. My ex was trying to get on a reality show. She was actually on a Skype tryout call with me in the background. She was trying out to be a friend of one of the stars on the show, and her role was to be the instigator. So the casting agent was asking her questions like, "How is your relationship with your boyfriend?" She goes, "He be out of pocket sometimes, and I gotta stay on top of him. You know how it is, girl." I'm one of the most chill people ever, so I was in the background like, what? So she carries on the conversation with the agent and then asked me a few questions like, "So, X's name tells me she's caught you cheating several times, and you guys fight about it all the time. The producers love this angle about you. Would you like to join our show?" I'm like, for her, sure. And let me tell you, she was capping like a mother fricker. Made all of that up to get on the show, and the producers knew it. But she loved, quote, the angle. Edit. She didn't get the role, and we broke up because she actually ended up cheating on me with multiple people. I hate to say it, OP, but your ex would do pretty decently in showbiz. Being willing to make up anything for the content, that's what gets it done, unfortunately. Story 41. When my sister was 13, she was invited onto a TV show in Hong Kong that followed kids/teens living a day in the life of a particular occupation. She was asked to work in a bakery. On the day of the shoot, she was up and ready super early, but the crew arrived 2 hours late. They later edited this to make it look like my sister had slept in. At the bakery, they specifically asked her to swap out sugar for salt and knock over a stand of baked bread, all for the camera. In both instances, she questioned why they wanted her to do this, and they said it's just for the camera. She was portrayed like a really incapable teenager, all for the drama. And from that day, I was 11, I knew never to believe what happens on Reality shows. Story 42. A woman I know ran a rescue center for small animals, and TV company approached her about doing an episode of their show. She would take animals from people who bought pets but decided they didn't want to take care of them, like rabbits after Easter, pet hamsters, rats, and guinea pigs. They pitched it as some sort of animal charity documentary, but it was really one of those shows about hoarders, and they wanted to make her look nuts for having a ton of animals. Story 43. Not a reality show, but the BBC does a show called Songs of Praise, which is basically a televised church service from a different UK church each week. And it's absolutely fake as hell. I was in a professional choir brought in to dress up and pretend to look like the local church choir, because the local church choir sucked. Once they'd filmed all those bits, we had to change out of the cassocks into ordinary clothing, and got planted throughout the congregation of actual local churchgoers, so there'd be some decent singers there to try to make the audience sound reasonable in their audience shots, rather than the usual mumblers most churches have. This was all filmed quite late at night on a Thursday, so they set up floodlights outside aimed inwards towards the stained glass windows to give the impression of heavenly sunshine blessing us on a glorious Sunday. Jesus would be thrilled, I'm sure, but I found the whole thing to be quite tiring and miserable. Story 44. I've been on the set of The Bachelor and another reality show on E. Being behind the scenes made me draw the conclusion, they're all bullcrap. Staged drama with a little bit of reality dropped in. Even saw a staged first kiss on The Bachelor. It went something like this by the director. Okay, you guys walk from this direction, and if you're going to kiss, do it right there. Cameras will be here and here. I also won a trip to Hawaii on The Price is Right. That show is legit. Story 45. I don't know if you would consider mine a family television show, but my mom was on Intervention, Season 6, Episode 8, and the camera crew told my mom it was for a community college project on addiction, while the rest of us knew it was for national television. They recorded us going through our everyday lives, and it was not at all scripted. My mom didn't know until she walked into the intervention room and she recognized the woman hosting it from the show. She broke down and agreed to take treatment, so they sent her to Palm Beach, Florida, where she continued to stay after treatment. The aftermath is a whole different story. She's relapsed at least 10 times and is still struggling. I ended up moving here at 16 only to be left homeless by my mom, who had to be admitted to detox and rehab. So I struggled through college trying to find different places to live. But the light at the end of the tunnel is that I got my tuition waived and my degree for free because I was homeless. The loopholes you have to jump through to escape student debt are insane. If there were any reality show that I would hope actually was somewhat real or useful, I think Intervention would be pretty close to it. Now, I haven't seen it. Maybe it's an awful show or something. But the idea behind it is at least kind of nice. Getting people who need help and, well, want help because that's the only way it works, help, is not such a bad thing. Alas, keeping up with it is truly the hard part. Story 46. In the UK in 1974, there was one of the first Fly on the Wall series called The Family. I hadn't seen the program, wasn't born, but I did end up working for one of the daughters as a Saturday girl in her hairdressing salon. She talked about the experience sometimes. They got to be good friends with the cameraman, but overall I think she wished they hadn't done it. The episodes are available on YouTube. I watched them a couple of years ago for the first time. I was quite surprised with how raw it all seemed. Worth a watch for a snapshot of 70s life. Story 47. My friend was on MTV's Made in high school. He was a nerd who smelled funny and worked in a video game store, but the rest was fabricated. They had him go on a date with a girl who already had a boyfriend in real life. His, quote, love interest was a real jerk of a girl who had never given him the time of day, but as soon as she saw cameras, she was all about it. She vanished as soon as they did. He acted kind of full of himself for a couple of years after the show too, which was an unfortunate side effect, but luckily, he's back to his normal, dorky self now. Story 48. I wasn't in such a situation, but I have seen a German show where they secretly filmed a show called Daughter-in-Law Wanted, or whatever that is in German. They hired 2 actors, dad and son, to fool them. The crew from the reality TV show sometimes told them what they should say, even things that aren't true. In this case, the son acted that he likes turtles. The crew bought a crap ton of turtle figures and plushies and placed them in the house, and told him to say that he also goes to the zoo to watch turtles. Besides the thing that some things were scripted, they only got €100 for being filmed. The TV channel where they broadcast that show makes a few thousand, if not a few tens of thousands of euros per minute. Also, they had to sign that they're not mentally disabled. The problem was there is that there was no extra checking. So if they are a mentally disabled person, they could sign it, and then it's filmed. They probably do that because a huge audience likes watching others worse than them, and the TV crew don't want someone to say that they abuse mentally disabled people to amuse others. Story 49. I was a side story in an hour-long reality-type show. There wasn't any manufactured drama, but the way they edited it led people to believe there was some. Granted, this wasn't really a show to highlight drama like the old MTV Real Worlds, but they definitely wanted a little tension, and they did it all through editing. Even more amusing were some of the comments I read on the websites afterwards. The conclusions some people arrived at were so off, it was almost funny. Story 50. Friend of mine was on Don't Tell the Bride, the one where the husband gets like 12 grand and has to plan every aspect of a wedding without the bride's involvement. Typically, the weddings end up being some selfish bullcrap all about the husband, which the wife sometimes ends up enjoying. My buddy said when they went into the initial planning sessions with the show's crew, him and his missus were separated and grilled about their first, second, third, all the way down to like a 9th or 10th choice of weddings. Any ideas which matched the other person's were instantly thrown out, as were his top 3 ideas. Basically, they forced him to come up with about 10 different plans for a wedding and pick the one they believed she would like the least, just for drama. They only went on the show because they were super short on money and hoped they would get a decent wedding on the show's dime. They ended up having another wedding they funded themselves a few years later because the one they were forced into for the show was so awful. I was also working as a shift manager for Burger King when they filmed an episode of Back to the Floor, a show about high-up managers coming back to work a couple of days as a basic staff member in their company. The dude involved was super chill, but the production staff wouldn't give us any real time to work with him, so it screwed us over on that shift because we basically had a dead station in the kitchen. They also filmed a montage of him running a closing shift, and they did a "will they get the restaurant cleaned up and closed down in time" theme. They ended the montage with us all turning the lights off and leaving with a cry of success from the manager. Then the film crew screwed off and we had to go back into the restaurant and finish the job. Story 51. Back in 2005, my parents redid my sister's room to look like a horse's stable. We lived on a few acres and had 2 horses, and she was a horse girl. My mom sent photos to a Home and Crafts magazine and ended up getting into a special edition about cool kids' rooms. A few weeks later, we got a call from ABC wanting us to be on Wife Swap. We weren't super serious about being on the show, but they offered us $50,000, so we at least heard them out. They interviewed my mom and dad over the phone, who got the sense that they'd taken us for a super redneck family, and were hoping to swap us with a city family or something along those lines. In reality, we're a pretty normal group. My dad is a pharmacist, my mom drove a Lexus at the time, and would probably have loved a few weeks of city life. They interviewed my sister as well, but I never talked to them. I was sick when my family did the initial photo shoot for the magazine, and the wife swap folks weren't too interested in me. All in all, we could tell they were looking for extreme people from different walks of life to churn as much drama as possible. They didn't find that with my mom, and we didn't make the cut, but pretty glad we didn't end up going through with it. Story 52. My aunt was all set up for an episode of Super Nanny for my 2 cousins. Both girls, one teenager and the other almost teen at the time. The younger being the main force behind most of the craziness. But the older one found out and told the younger and sat her down for a few episodes to show her what was coming. Everything suddenly got so peaceful. 2 pleasant children from a pleasant home. A few days later, the producers called my aunt to schedule the filming, and she told them she'd still love to do it, but they completely had turned their behavior around, so they might not get a show out of it. So it was cancelled. But that bit of news never made it to the younger one, so she continued operating under the impending super nanny threat for a long time, like too long. For another few years, it was like threatening a child with calling Santa Claus for bad behavior. And it was equally effective. Sweet girl, but not the brightest. Story 53. A good friend of mine from high school was on one of the wife swap shows, and it was like 100% fake. The producers decided since his family was part Asian, they should do martial arts together, and brought all of them gis and had them learn some basic Tai Chi stuff for a scene, even though none of them were martial artists at all. The swap mom was portrayed as an absolute jerk from New Jersey, but my friend said once the cameras were off, she was the sweetest. Would order them pizzas to eat because the dinner scenes would take so long to shoot that food would get cold. My friend said even stuff like waking up and going to bed was staged. It was like you just tell the producers you've got plans tonight and they'll shoot bedtime at 5 p.m. Call me crazy, but I think that last part is kind of preferable. I wouldn't want my waking up and going to sleep to be filmed. That's just weird, man. I don't think I could do it. No subathons for me, I guess. Story 54. I was on one over a decade ago, and apparently it still airs on occasion. It's embarrassing to me because it was a hoarder-type show. Not hoarders, though. And they pretty much made it look like it was all me, even though a lot of the clutter in our house was due to my husband having the closets full and bringing stuff over from his parents' home. So there was no room for storage. But also not allowing me to get rid of anything. His mom was a hoarder way worse than what we had, and would, quote-unquote, gift us stuff when she ran out of storage room. He encouraged me to be on it because I was pregnant and we needed the money, and then immediately told me he could use the recording to show I should not get custody if we ever divorced. It basically made me look lazy as hell, but did not disclose that at the time it was filmed, I was 8 months pregnant, supposed to be on bed rest, and had been working 2 full-time jobs that totaled about 85 hours a week. I also have ADHD, autism, and had pretty severe depression at the time, which all wreaked havoc with something called executive functioning, which has a lot to do with organization and keeping things neat. Since figuring that fact out and getting into treatment for it, things have totally changed. They told us the house wasn't cluttered enough to film, and they actually moved in boxes and things from storage units and from room to room. They told us that the house was not cluttered enough to film, and actually moved in boxes and things from storage units, making the house look more filled up. And there were scenes of me heavily pregnant moving boxes half my size on camera, but they got moved back into the room over and over again to film more times, and then as soon as the film crew left, my husband took them all back in the house and said we can't throw anything away without going through it item by item. Anyway, one of the big things they were trying to do was have us go shopping with a friend or something, and wanted to have one of my high school friends show up and then act shocked about the state of the house. But by that point, I was super isolated. I had no friends to call, and my husband didn't want to have any of his family over. They were the only people I was allowed to talk to or see. They also wanted the lady who came to help us organize to kind of shame and berate me, and she absolutely refused to. She really is a wonderful person and super helpful and supportive, and even checked in on me afterwards just to see how things were going and how my son was doing. It's kind of funny, but you could tell they were trying to create a whole lot of drama, and not being able to bring others in kept that from happening. The irony is, watching it and talking to some of the people involved did make me realize that my marriage at the time was abusive, and that my husband was pretty controlling. It encouraged me to go back to school and work, instead of being totally dependent on him. I just hate that it is still out there because I'm pretty successful at my job, but still living in the same community. And this way I always think it's weird that people will recognize me, and I'm afraid of it embarrassing my son. At least the good thing is our house looks totally different now. I would tell anybody considering a show like that not to do it because they always create drama and twist things to make things look worse or more enticing to viewers. They don't follow up with help after the show like they imply they will. The amount they pay is absolutely not worth it, and you have no control over where or how long it is shown, so it can haunt you for decades. Story 55. My friend in middle school was on an episode of Super Nanny. He told me that everything was already planned out and staged. At the end of the day, he got to meet his NBA idol Dwayne Wade and came into school the next day with Wade-branded clothes and shoes Wade had given him. I also knew my friend was not truly being himself in the episode. He's usually a pretty quiet, shy, and respectable kid. At the end of the episode, I remember them showing him beating Wade in a one-on-one basketball game. If that isn't scripted, I don't know what is. As far as I'm concerned, nothing really changed for his family. This is kind of like the good end for one of these shows, right? Of course, hoping that the kid was really not a problematic kid. Because if they were a menace and then acted like they got better for the show to get the Dwayne Wade stuff, and then went back to being a menace, sure, that's awful. But if it was a kid just acting for the cameras, then hey, they kind of made out like a bandit here. Story 56. One of my relatives, second grade cousin or something, does camera for a big TV channel here in Germany. He told me about a few shows once. According to him, the wife swap show is not scripted or staged. But behind the camera, the production tries to upset the people. You know, they said this and that about you and your house, behind each other's backs, stuff like that. Then they get the camera rolling. Or they have many takes, so the people finally lose their nerves. He said he never worked for them, but instead for a house makeover show. He liked the atmosphere. They were contributing to the family's well-being and did something good. The shows were never staged. All the tragic stories were completely real, and there were only nice people on set. Fortunately, as a cameraman, he could choose the shows he would like to work on and decline others. Haven't met him for years, though, so the info is at least 5 to 10 years old. Plus, he worked for them, so take it with a grain of salt. Story 57. Not super related, but an interesting story. My friend went to Hollywood on American Idol a few years ago. She told me they kept trying to get her to mess up lines and ask for a redo for the camera. She refused and sang it the right way, but was sent home that day. To this day, she's convinced that she was sent home because she refused to add drama to her scene. She then said after she was let go, all the interview questions were like, "How does it feel to know you let your family down after they supported you so much in your dream?" Just really trying to get people to cry. She said the whole thing was the worst experience ever. Story 58. We had a renovation team visit my city to visit the school for the deaf's haunted house. Every year before that, it was a citywide staple that everyone loved, and by far the scariest one in the area. The kids put so much work in. Then the show turned up and fixed like 5 of the boys' bedrooms, and added in some random stuff to the haunted house. The problem being that they blocked off an area that is mostly neighborhoods, but a lot of through traffic, for weeks. Now, even before COVID, the kids hadn't done the haunted house in a long time. Not sure why. Story 59. I was on a reality music show. You know how all reality shows have one kind of jeopardy? Ours was that someone wasn't going to make it to a competition. It took up a huge part of an episode. Would he be there when we all got to the competition? The thing is, we all knew where he was. He lived miles away and was driving himself. From that day on, I knew all reality shows were faked. A lot of crap went on that show. Fake auditions, fake sackings, some very dodgy, possibly child abuse that was covered up. No wonder it ever did well. Story 60. Not a family show per se, but my high school was asked to be on a reality TV show called If You Really Knew Me, which was about high school cliques. I think we were also asked to be on a show about our journalism club too. Our school turned down all the gigs because the teachers thought it would paint us all in a bad light, and hey, they were probably right. Us kids were originally pretty bummed, but after we watched some of the MTV reality shows about other high schoolers, we realized they were right, and it would probably be documenting us doing embarrassing crap with artificial drama. I also knew a geek who was on Beauty and the Geek. Everyone was told to play up their parts, so the geeks had to develop geekier mannerisms and hobbies, and the beauties were forced to say stupid things. The romances were real, but that's just what happens when you bring together a group of young people, and the producers played it up to continue the drama. Story 61. My family was the focus of a reality special/documentary because, at the time, we had the most documented autistic kids in one family. Our record was 6, but I don't know if it's been topped by now. It mostly showed scenes of our family out of context, or with a different interpretation of what was actually happening. There's one scene of our whole family out to dinner, and the camera focused on me sobbing at the table with a dramatic narration going on. Something like, OP can't control her autism. But I wasn't having a random meltdown. I was sobbing because my severely autistic nonverbal little brother wouldn't sit still, and I just wanted us to be able to eat and get the shot. It didn't help that we were the center of attention with the whole place gawking at my hyperactive siblings and our big camera crew. I had a lot of meltdowns as a kid, but it didn't sit right with me that the narration chalked it up to a random autistic outburst, instead of considering why I was so upset. Plus, there's footage of fat 8-year-old me pathetically crying somewhere out there, so hey, that's nice to think about. I don't think a reality show could ever have good intentions following 6 autistic children. Like, that just seems like they know what they're doing, right? They're either going to demonize them or infantilize them. I feel like there's no in between. It's reality TV after all. And for some things, that's not as bad as it is for this thing, in my opinion. Story 62. I had a coworker whose former employer, a home builder, was a sponsor of an episode of Extreme Home Makeover. Her experience on the show left a very bad taste in her mouth. She said the employees of her company were required to work 18-hour days and were treated like crap. The stars of the show, like Ty Pennington, only came out of their trailers and pretended to do work on the house for the cameras a few times during the weeks, and the volunteers working on the house were told not to talk to them. The week of the build, her company was basically strong-armed by the producers into buying cars for the family and setting up a college fund for the children, despite the fact they had already paid a fortune to be sponsors and paid for all the materials. The family, who wasn't financially stable to begin with, couldn't afford to pay the taxes on the improved home, as it was now worth way more. Ended up calling the division manager of the home builder and raising hell about it, demanding access to the money in the college fund. They ended up having to file a police report for harassment because the father was threatening people at the builder, because he felt they were responsible for his troubles. Story 63. My uncle and his family were on an episode of Wife Swap, and we were invited over for family holiday dinner. We had Thanksgiving at their house each year anyway. It was a very weird experience. Signed our souls away in papers before being cued to enter the house. I was in about 1 second of the episode walking in their doorway. They then had the adults in the dining room for some very staged dinner shots, while the kids just sat quietly in the living room bored out of our minds for hours. Uncle hated the experience as they coercively coached them towards certain behavior, and made my sweet little cousin out to be as if she was a demanding, spoiled brat, which she very much so was not, but they would give her lines to yell at her mom and stage arguments between them and whatnot. Weird stuff, and about as far from reality as it could be. Story 64. I knew a couple who were on Wife Swap and it was 100% real. My friends were lovable slobs with alternative careers, theater and aspiring writer, and very little money as a result. The other family was well-to-do with a wife/mother who was an extremely uptight professional organizer. The sloppy theater mom tried to get the other family to loosen up and explore their creative side, but the kids hated her and rebelled. The father hated her too. His wife was a Stepford wife, and my friend wore no makeup, didn't shave, wore funky clothes like dresses you'd see at Renaissance fairs. Stepford mom had extremely high anxiety the whole time she stayed with sloppy theater dad, insulted him, berated him, etc. She insisted he get an office job with collared shirt and tie. I don't know what the producers held over his head, but he complied, even though he was miserable and humiliated. It was really hard to watch. It wasn't going to be a nice ending neatly wrapped with a bow. Luckily, a mutual friend of ours is a child psychologist and was asked to help everybody. I don't remember what good he did on the slob side, but the Stepford kids embraced him and were able to get through the whole thing without crying. They tried to be nicer to theater mom. Their dad was still a jerk, though. They were people who had very rigid definitions of right versus wrong in terms of ways to live, dress, and behave, and appeared to be threatened/angered by people who didn't adhere to those rules. Both sides came off as nutty, but then again, we already knew that about my friends. Insane for this to be right after a post about wife swap that's like, oh, it was 100% fake, and this one just starts out being, it was 100% real. I guess if the drama's already there, they don't have to manufacture anything. Story 65. A friend of mine in high school was on an episode of MTV's Made. I'm in the background in a shot or two. Obviously can't go into details because each episode was sort of different, but I would say generally, it was a good time for him. He was a nice dude coming out of some real difficult family circumstances that seemed to have gotten a win. He was a really friendly and out there guy who didn't mind being the center of attention normally, so I think it made the whole thing easier for him. The celeb they brought in as a mentor was super nice and actually helpful, and the end result had a real lasting impact for years after. The only really weird thing was how a lot of people in the production got around town only by limo. We lived in a small Midwestern town, so it really stuck out. Story 66. I work in TV out in LA, and I can tell you firsthand, 70% or more is made up. I'm not going to drop names on the shows I've worked on, but I'll say this. Almost any time where someone is supposed to be surprised at something, they're not. They're usually always involved. Anytime someone meets someone for the first time, likely fake. Anytime someone acts like they didn't know something, likely fake. Anytime there's a reveal, likely fake. There are multiple setups, multiple takes, multiple versions of reactions, scenes are written out ahead of time, reactions as usually predetermined. I had a friend who worked on a ghost show where the host believed in ghosts, but my friend didn't. He was an AP at the time. The show was so boring that he would split from the group to cause some distanced commotion to get the host to react. The host would then go over and find a way to prove it was a ghost when really, it was a producer throwing a can as far as he could. Truck drive away from house for reveal, family has already seen it. Two people get in a fight, usually planned. I can't even with this industry, it's so fake. I've gotten so fed up with it that I'm actively trying to work in it less and less. Story 67. It's all fake. All the scenes, all the drama, everything you do is staged. I was on a very short-lived National Geographic reality show for my job, Garbage Moguls, and everything I did for that show was set up and you were told what to do. What you said was probably the only thing that wasn't fake, just in the sense I was never given any scripts to memorize or say. It was all just improv, I suppose. But everything that happened to me was all faked. They also love to edit situations that happen to imply more than what actually happened. Like they told me to go into the bathroom and help a coworker get something out of his eye, and I didn't even think twice about it. Later in the show, they made it seem like I went into the bathroom to hook up with him. It was awful. Story 68. My wife's cousin got married on my big fat redneck wedding. We were there for the wedding and reception. The only parts that I saw that were scripted were things like the gift exchange, the producers gave them sappy things to say to each other, and the actual service. The producers let them do one service all the way through, then basically made them redo with silly redneck jokes added in. However, all the crazy redneck stuff they did was 100% my wife's cousin's ideas. When they told the producers that instead of throwing the garter belt/wedding bouquet, they would be tying them to a Crisco-covered pig and having the guests chase after them, the producers were like, oh, well, that's a first. It was quite the spectacle. It just goes to show that there are things that only real people could come up with, huh? Producers, you couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. Story 69. Friend of a friend was the set dresser for a home reno show where the celebrity renovator would go in and find all these horrific code violations, which he had gone in a few days earlier to make. I had a plumber come install a boiler, and he had stories about the horrific plumbing he had to go in and fix after said celebrity renovator was finished with the place. Isn't it remarkable how the cameras are running when all the bad stuff happens? It's all bullcrap. Yeah, celebrity renovator just doesn't sound like a very promising title to me. As far as I'm concerned, the trades are a place for absolute masters of their craft, artisans. A celebrity renovator does not have a great chance at being one of those, at least from what I can tell. Anyway, that is all the stories we have for today. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.